All right. Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all here today on a Friday at around lunchtime. We're delighted to have you all here for our first webinar for 2025. So it's good to be back with our webinar series. Today, we're really fortunate to have with us Honorary Professor Anne-Marie Hede, who's going to be talking to us about investing early to identify candidate aspirations and capabilities, with a focus on the application process for selection. I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm coming to you from today, the Darug people, and acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands that you're all joining us on today, and to welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here on the webinar. We're really fortunate to have Anne-Marie Hede with us, who has an extensive career working in graduate research and a wealth of knowledge to share for us. Anne-Marie was the Dean of Graduate Research and Head of the Office of Research Quality and Integrity at Victoria University, Melbourne, for 6 years to 2022. And we're very, very honoured to say has been a member of the ACGR executive from 2019 to 2022, and now holds an honorary professorship with the Victoria University. And she's just recently established her consulting firm, High Ambitions Consulting, which is supporting institutions across the entirety of the sector on issues related to research and research training goals. So welcome, everyone, and welcome, Anne-Marie, and I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. Much appreciated. I do appreciate that. Everybody's right to hear me. A few thumbs up is always nice. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Tracy. I really do appreciate that warm welcome from ACGR. As you know, it's a bit of a stomping ground for me, an old stomping ground, so I'm delighted to be here. Before we start, though, I would like to acknowledge country and also diversity, that I acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal owners of land. I'm on the Burrong and Wurrung of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and particularly anyone who's on the webinar today of Indigenous culture. And I do want to thank them for their care of the land, the sea and community. I also respect people of all backgrounds, gender, sexuality, abilities and cultures. So thank you very much for joining us today. Just a little bit of background to the webinar. Obviously all universities, and I know that we've got universities represented from Australia and also New Zealand, which is lovely to have you here. You're all doing things to support HDR candidates. But I suppose I wanted to discuss, and ACGR particularly wanted to discuss, like, are we really thinking about career aspirations and existing capabilities of candidates on selection, so that we can actually offer them research and development opportunities that are fit for purpose. So it's really sort of throwing this question out, are we doing this well enough? And I know across the universities in Australia, in particular, you know, you're all doing things differently so that you are aligning these career aspirations with capabilities. So we'll talk a little bit more about those. But I suppose I wanted to say, can such a focus create better decision making at selection, so that we are selecting candidates knowing what they need to a much larger extent, and also so that we can actually set expectations for both the university and for the candidates, so that they have a good understanding equally of what their obligations are in terms of candidate development. So the question is, are we making a complex process more complex? I just sort of wanted to say a bit of a spoiler alert. We won't have a definitive answer to the question here today, because it is a complex question and it will have complex answers. And every university will be different and approach things differently by virtue of the nature of the way universities are quite different. But it is good to have this conversation and for us to really think about how we might be able to improve selection to enhance graduate outcomes. So just to give you an idea of what the outline is, I hopefully won't be talking all the time because it's really important to hear from you. And this is a great opportunity for you to connect with each other. So we'll be using breakout rooms. So we'll look at the graduate research landscape, and then we'll go into a breakout room. Everyone will have the same topic, a little bit of an icebreaker so that you know who's in your breakout room, introduce yourself to each other, and then come back and do a little bit of reporting through the chat and just a couple of opportunities. We're on a bit of a tight timeline with an hour and a half with such a big topic. So please excuse me if you think, wow, I'm rushing this a little bit. I do have a bit to go through and do want to hear from you as well. And part 2 is really going to be about aligning those career aspirations, capability, and graduate outcomes, where we'll have breakout rooms, and there are 3 different topics. So the link to the breakout rooms, we'll put the guide for them. We'll put those into the chat just prior to the first breakout room. And when it comes to the second breakout room, I'm just hoping that you'll remember which breakout room topic you have, which I'm sure you will. And as well as that, I do want to let you know that we're going to be using Padlet. And I'm sure many of you have used Padlet before, either in your own teaching or at other webinars. Giving generously on that is fantastic, because the aim is at the end, we'll PDF those and distribute those to you as participants of the webinar, so that you've got that that you can refer to. And it's a great opportunity to learn from other organisations and their representatives. So hopefully that's all okay. If there's any main questions, please put it in the chat. Chasey's going to keep an eye on the chat for me, and hopefully we'll get through everything. Okay, so in terms of the graduate research landscape, we do know that actually you're constantly responding to factors that impact doctoral research. And I might add, just for the sake of brevity today, I am just referring to doctoral research. I am actually thinking of masters at the same time. So don't think that, that's not what it's about here. But, there are internal policies, there's external policies. You're always looking to actually respond to those, and they seem to be coming through quite regularly, although there's some movement that we wish would happen. Timely completion is important. Obviously, minimising attrition is very important, because obviously within Australia now, the RTP funding is only on completions, and that has taken a little bit of time in terms of a mindset for universities to actually turn that around, that it's not enrolment, it is only on completion. And obviously every university, every graduate research program, you're all trying to sort of distinguish yourself from others. So you're strategically recruiting your students, and therefore you want to strategically offer them something that actually aligns with the values of your own university and what you want to achieve. Fundamentally, though, the global principle of every graduate research program is about graduate outcomes. Okay, so it's not about the journey per se only. It's really about what are the graduate outcomes for our students, in terms of where will they be working, what will their employment status be, what salaries might they earn, or what are the career trajectories through the experience of research. And we know the fantastic skills that we get through a research project. Obviously then, what we have is we have universities all doing different things in terms of the formats of their degree. There's the traditional PhD, there's professional doctorates, PhD by or with publication, by portfolio, with an exegesis. There's higher doctorates, there's research masters that could be at the 1.5 or 2 years. And of course, within that framework, there's, industry embedded programs, and that's really very much been recently in the last few years, particularly responding to RTP policy. There's joint degrees or Cochitel degrees, joint badge degrees, there's compulsory work. So the iterations are, quite tremendous in terms of how a doctoral program can be crafted. And really, it's the innovation of the research leaders and the leaders in research management and administration that really can craft out some really unique opportunities for graduate researchers so that they are actually able to achieve those graduate outcomes. Professional development is usually scaffolded around the HDR curriculum, and it's typically at the candidate's discretion, okay? That there's, they can opt in, they can opt out, whatever they choose to do. If we look at PhD candidates, and I'm sorry, I don't have data on New Zealand, for those of you in New Zealand, but we do recently have a report that the University of Australia and ACGR collaborated upon, and they give us some information about the typical and realistic profiles of domestic and international candidates. I won't go through detail by detail because you've got the slides and I'm sure you can see what they are, but that's actually really insightful for us in terms of knowing who are the average candidates that come through. Obviously, there are differences, but it is good for us to know in terms of 37 years old coming in as a domestic, obviously then plenty of work experience, financial responsibilities, 52% are female, slightly older than their male counterparts. For international students, the average age is 31, and over the half of the PhD candidates who are international are between 30 and 39. So, that just gives us better insights into who might be applying to our institution for enrolment, for admission. And of course, PhD candidates, and there's quite a lot of literature on this, PhD candidates come into doing a PhD for intrinsic motivations or extrinsic motivations, and typically a combination of both, but there might be some that really come to the fore. So for example, for some candidates, it is about prestige, that they actually want to achieve this highest qualification that is possible. On the other hand, it's about lifestyle changes for some people, or a personal challenge or research interest. So coming to understand the motivations, whether we're necessarily asking on the application process or we're, just having this information ourselves, can actually really help us in terms of, helping students to understand, is this the right degree for me? And what is it that I'm going to need based on these motivations that might be driving me? I'm going to give some, just sort of like, when I think about it, it's a costly and it's a significant decision. I mean, for those of you on the webinar who do have a doctoral degree, you know that you probably made, weighed up a lot of things about doing this. You knew that it was going to be a big commitment in terms of time. If you were someone who is similar to what is in the University of Australia or ACGR report as typical, you might have come into the applying where you know that you're going to potentially lose income. You might be going down to part-time work. You might be going from full-time work. You might be going to a stipend, and that would be a very significant loss of income. Lifestyle changes, expenses associated with the degree, because we all know that we as doctoral students always put in ourselves. Family expenses, relocation, health and wellbeing. I'd be curious to know, like, if you've thought about this, if you've got any ideas, and happy to receive anything up on the chat, that, how this is a huge decision that people are making in terms of committing. And obviously what we want as institutions, when we admit someone into our program, what we do want to do is we want to make sure that we've made the right decision for them. We've got the right supervisor, we've got the right topic, and we're going to offer the right professional development for them so that they can actually get through and that we won't have any attrition along the way. Although I do remember one of my mentors many years ago saying that there is some good attrition along the way sometimes. And obviously we know sometimes they are quite difficult decisions, but zero attrition is probably not something that we can necessarily aspire to. We do know candidates are doing it tough. It's a bigger commitment. It's a bigger sacrifice. The issues around sustainability, around finances, have really come to the fore in the last few years, in particular with stipend rates for those scholarship candidates. We've also had, equity strategies that have, rightly so, invited more people from different backgrounds to come in and study with us. However, it's not always obvious to us what they need initially or even along the way to really support them. And applicant candidate career aspirations are actually really changing. Okay, we do know, for example, that the pathway that for me many years ago, it was typically it was an academic career outcome for most of my peers when we were doing our doctoral degrees. However, now those academic outcomes are fewer and far between. And we know that candidates are actually encouraged to be using their doctoral degrees in areas other than just academia. So, it's good in a way that we have this realization, but it's important for us as institutions to really harness this and make sure that we're offering those professional development opportunities that can really help our candidates to get where they need to be. Candidate experiences. I mean, this is from Cook et al. In 2021. And, when we look at this word cloud, they conducted some breakfast group discussions. When we look at this word cloud, there are a lot of paradoxes here. We can see it's isolating, it's fun, it's interesting, it's stress, it's challenging, it's network. So we do know that doctoral candidates and research candidates in general, that they have this sort of paradoxical experience, or an experience that's full of paradoxes. And how do we best support them along the way? And I know that with many professional development programs, it's not just about professional development focused on the research, it's also about the well-being of the HDR candidate, and it's helping them diversify their skills and work on their strengths, ameliorating their weaknesses where possible. So the ACGR has got a great set of guidelines, so good practice guidelines. And what I'm trying to do in this webinar today is join a whole heap of dots that come around together that land on the candidate. So obviously ACGR has got good practice guidelines regarding admission, selection and admission. So obviously there's that clear and transparency, and there's policies, and that there's an appropriate fit ultimately between the applicant, the research environment, the available resources, which is really about that whole professional development opportunity, and obviously the supervision capacity. So for universities, admitting somebody into a doctoral program is similarly an expensive activity a decision in terms of supervision. Okay, it's typically, when we cost this out, it's on a level C at about 5-6% on an annual basis. There could be a fee waiver scholarship in most cases, obviously, stipend scholarship. Okay, if we add this up over the 3 years, expenses associated with the research and the dissemination, research and professional development programs, HDR administration, and university overheads. So this decision is an enormous decision. I know that, universities typically have, multiple stages. They'll have committees. They do actually put quite a lot of work into the selection process. I'm not suggesting that they don't. Okay, so they really do a lot of work in terms of that selection process. But I suppose the question that I'm asking here today, just to start the conversation, is how much in this process are we really starting to think about career aspirations? What does this applicant really want to get out of this PhD or this research degree? Where do they want to be in 3-4 years' time, 5 years' time, even 10 years' time as a consequence of undertaking their research degree? So this is typically what's happening around at least Australia, and typically minimum eligibility requirements, the proposal, strategic alignment, supervisor availability, academic merit and research potential to carry out the research, and English language requirements. But probably what's missing there is we don't really maybe so much ask about career aspirations. Not, at that whole, this is a standard part of our process. It could be in there and it may be implicit and we have to look through, but are we explicitly exploring with our applicants what is it that they want to really get out of undertaking this degree? And now I'm a little bit ahead of myself, so that's good. So we're just going to have one short breakout room just for about 5 minutes or so. Really try to get into it as fast as you can. There's no Padlet at this moment, but it would be great to hear from a couple of groups, just what they talked about in their group. So there's not the time for us to go through all 6 groups because we will have 6. So please don't be offended if your group hasn't been asked, all right? But let's talk about it. Introduce yourselves first. What are your applicants? Are you really thinking about your applicants' career aspirations? Are you gathering the information explicitly or tacitly? Are we making some assumptions? Are we starting to recognise the strengths and the weaknesses of candidates or applicants? And do we recognise diversity enough in terms of career aspirations in applicants at this point in time? So, Tracy, you're going to do the magical. All right. So I was fortunate enough to work with one of the groups. Now I'm just checking what you can see. You can't see anything at this point, can you? I've got to reshare. Okay. There we go. All right, that all should be good. So I was fortunate to work with a group and it was quite interesting. I think there was a little bit of a gamut where a smaller university, for example, has a niche type of applicant. And whilst they don't necessarily have the career outcomes that we might think about for a younger candidate, and I will say that they're not asking those questions, but actually this conversation has thought, well, maybe that's a good thing to ask. But there's not much in terms of formality in terms of asking these questions. There certainly is some indication that there's some questions about motivations. And some of those might be formal, others might be that they're a little bit more informal, or that's that tacit knowledge that's collected through the supervisor relationship. But there's not much going on in terms of, really formally asking, what are your career aspirations? So I've just because of time, I think if it's okay with you, I've sort of summarized what goes on in my group. Would anyone else like to say something in particular, something that they're doing at their university or they heard in their breakout room?
We talked a little bit about mid-career people coming into doctoral programs and having very clear sense of where they wanted to go and not really, and having topics that were well aligned, but not necessarily the university being very conscious or involved in that process.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. And it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because obviously a cohort like that is going to be needing and looking for different sorts of professional development. Maybe, very different from someone who's come from honours and maybe has just been working in an academic environment, for example. So it's pretty interesting. And for us to really start thinking about this, it can actually help us with actually our researcher professional development, what we offer. So I might just step into the next section, and after a little bit of a chat on this, we'll go into breakout rooms again. Now that we're all set up, I think we're going to have a nice smooth breakout room, and we'll come back and we'll hear from you. So if we think about sort of like career aspirations and capability trajectory from admission to completion, if we think about this, we really, there are career aspirations. We're coming into a PhD because we want to get something out of it. We've got capabilities, and I'm talking as in I'm a student. From a university's perspective, though, we should expect that there are gaps, okay? Because if there aren't gaps in between career aspirations and capabilities, you sort of think, well, how are we going to actually advance this person? So the capability development really addresses the gaps and develops strengths in the candidates. And so it's this area of capability development, and we know that there are many capability frameworks that you might be using. And then, so those career outcomes and capabilities, if there's better alignment there, those outcomes and those capabilities are aligned, and that candidate has actually got a much better chance, I would say, in terms of what they are able to achieve through their career. I've sort of developed a few little personas, and maybe we'll just talk through those a little bit. But if we think about it, okay, the academic aspirations, as I said earlier, there are fewer and fewer of these opportunities. And, whilst many of our graduates have, in Australia at least, there's a high percentage of those being employed on graduation. If they're in this academic aspiration area, it may just be sessional work that continues after that. So how do we actually get them onto that trajectory that they're off that sessional treadmill and they're actually getting some, contracts and continuity of employment, and they're being supported? They may be securing a postdoc research or, publishing, and, their aspirations may be that they actually want to be a senior academic or take on a HE leadership role. There's probably a different group yet again where they're industry and private sector aspirations. So they're working in R&D roles, they're data scientists or analysts, and they're applying their high-level research skills that may be, for example, in machine learning or business intelligence. They're consulting, policy analysis, science communication and publishing, entrepreneurships and startups, or they may be involved in intellectual property and patent law. So, there's the academic, the industry and private, and then there's the government and public policy aspirations. So again, that policy analysis or advisor in government. They may be joining public research organisations, working in science, diplomacy, leading research-driven policy reforms in education, health, climate change, or advising on AI, for example, increasingly so. Then, of course, there's that interdisciplinary and flexible career aspirations. So there's portfolio careers where they're combining research, consulting and teaching, engaging in interdisciplinary collaborations, employing creative and communication skills, so that could be, for example, our science communicators, or working remotely or internationally. So, and then there's another group yet again, which I thought was really about that social impact and not-for-profit aspirations. So they're really very much concerned about advocating for social justice, sustainability or human rights. They're contributing to global health initiatives and working in community-based research or leading diversity. So I sort of thought, yeah, there are sort of like a few personas that we could work with in this webinar, and in our breakout rooms, we'll use these personas and think about, well, what would these personas really need in terms of, if we knew that coming into our program, this is what their career aspirations are, what would we provide them in terms of research and professional development? I did sort of want to say, how I said I was trying to join the dots, so many different dots there are in this HDR space. But I suppose, we really have to think about, well, what does the AQF, the Australian Quality Framework, actually say we need to have our graduates be like at the end of their degree? So, the doctoral degree, systematic and critical understanding of a complex field of learning, and its specialised research skills for the advancement of learning and of a professional practice. As I said earlier, we should expect gaps. We can expect gaps here, that our candidates, our applicants won't be coming in with these graduate capabilities. We should be expecting that they're not going to have this knowledge, this systematic and critical understanding. Okay, so our program has to help them and facilitate them to develop this in themselves. Also, that they'll have these skills. So it's not just knowledge, it's skills, engaging in that critical reflection, synthesis, and evaluation, developing, adapting, and implementing research methodologies to extend and redefine existing knowledge or practice, and disseminate and promote new insights to their peers and to the community, and generate original knowledge and understanding to make that substantial contribution to an area, an academic area, a discipline, or a professional practice. And it's about applying those knowledge and skills. So the AQF is quite clear in terms of actually what our candidates need to be like on graduation. And typically we have, you know, a capability framework. And I know in Australia, the VITE framework has been something that's been quite popular for a number of years. In the last few years, there have been a number of universities that have developed their own framework, and they're using that so that it's more strategically aligned with their own institution and representing those values. But you might have a capability framework that is the VITE, your own, or you may be developing that at the moment. But it's that suite of opportunities that will develop, that will facilitate the development of the capabilities in our candidates. They're designed to ensure that graduates are skilled, adaptable, ready for diverse careers, and very much ready for diverse careers, because that gives them a much greater opportunity on graduation. Typically, they move beyond research skills, so they're about leadership, communication, and professional skills, and they should be aligning with the employability and workforce needs. So if we look, for example, at the Accord of last year, there's some information in there about what is it that Australia needs in terms of its workforce, and how can HDRs actually, you know, contribute to addressing the gaps. They provide a roadmap for student development, and they help institutions and supervisors design targeted professional development. And we're going to talk a little bit about that targeted professional development in the breakout rooms. But it's really getting our candidates to have the skills to be thinking about, well, what is it the career aspirations I have? What do I need to do as I'm a candidate to actually develop skills that will enable me to be in a position to achieve and realize my career aspirations. And the ACGR has best practice. This is another little dot in connecting all things. So we've got the ACGR's principle for graduate research candidate development. So ACGR is categorical in the sense that, you know, candidates should be supported to undertake original research and scholarly activities whilst developing key research and employability skills for academic and non-academic careers. Early assessment. Now, I know that many of us, as you know, an institution, we typically tend to wait for candidature to actually really think about, well, this is what the candidate is going to need, X, Y, Z, during the course of their candidature and at different stages of their candidature. However, you know, it can be a fair time sitting pre-candidature and not having some guidance in terms of professional development or what might be needed at that point in time. It can potentially be a bit of a lost time. And if we think about what we want to do is we want to set people up for success, maybe we need to be thinking very, very early about this aspiration, professional development, and that we're really thinking about diverse cultural and educational backgrounds and employment backgrounds. And I just did mention about making sure that we've got opportunities that are relevant for the candidate at their particular period of time. So, any questions or comments so far? There's a lot of you. It'd be good to hear from someone what people's thinking is thus far.
It's lovely to hear about those very diverse roles that people can move into, and exciting to think about the different potential. And I can see that there's some people from careers services here today about the sorts of things that may be possible in light of that. So exciting conversation. Thank you.
That's good. Thanks, Susan. Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts? I mean, it's an interesting area, I think, in the sense that, and I must say, I was dean for 6.25 years, and prior to that, associate deans, research and research training. So it's really interesting how it wasn't so explicit, the thinking about what is it that this individual actually wants to achieve as a consequence of doing this degree. We do this at the undergraduate level and even the master's coursework level, like categorically, we do that very well. I know at Victoria University, we introduced like a motivational statement as, why does somebody want to do this degree? And that actually helped us to sort of frame a little bit about, well, what is it that they want out of this degree? Are we really understanding that well? Do we have some knowledge about them? But I suppose, there wasn't that explicit connection then about what professional development that person might need. Danny, I notice you've got your hand up. Thank you.
Sorry, it took me a while to figure out how to raise my hand.
That's okay.
Thank you for the conversations. I think this is really important. And I think, we all try to do this to some extent. So I'm the HDR Education Coordinator at Flinders University, taking care of research and development for HDR students and supervisors. And we have built this into the HDR induction now. So the online induction within 2 months of candidature asks those questions specifically. Who are you? Where are you coming from? Where do you want to go? What skills do you need? But I suppose the difficulty is, we found a way to ask the questions. Now, what do we do with those questions?
Yeah.
So how do we actually help those students get there? Considering these are individual answers, and we have 1,000 students. So how do we then target our training and development and help them get there? So that's kind of where we're at. We've asked the questions, but now what?
Yeah, well, it's a good start, and it is, you've got large numbers of students. Like, it's not necessary that we can have a bespoke program for 1,000 students. And so how do we actually maybe think about our research development program so that we can get some commonalities, some niche pathway, because there will be some commonalities regardless of where someone wants to be. We do want to have some professional integrity, like those sorts of things that are core. They're basic core that any university wants in its graduates. And we've got to think about things that are going to be suitable for the research student, the doctoral degree. So thanks, Danny. I appreciate that. And hopefully, I did say way back when, spoiler report, we won't have answers. Maybe there'll be like little bits of tidbits of answers in there when we come out of the breakout rooms. So what I thought we'd do now is we'd head into breakout rooms. Now, there are three different lines of inquiry, okay? So we're going to get you into, if you can just bear with me for a minute, I'm going to get you into 6 breakout rooms. And so there's topic A, B, or C. So you will just do one topic. That's all you need to do, all right? But there will be another group that's similarly doing that same that topic, okay? So it's 2 by 3. So hopefully that's clear. We're going to think about, for the purpose of the breakout rooms, we're going to think about our personas, okay? The aspiring academic and knowledge creator, the aspiring industry private sector professional, the aspiring policy and governance leader, and the aspiring freelancer, and the aspiring social impact leader. So thinking about those, that's what we're going to think about, okay? So let's assume we all work for the same university and this is what we've decided on, okay, for the purposes of this webinar. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, in each group, a different scenario, okay? So one is actually about admission, one is about adoption, selection, the other is about adoption, and the other one is about transformation. So you as a leader, you know, are going to be responsible for actually making this happen, okay? Now, the idea is that there's a Padlet for each topic, okay? Not for each breakout room, just for each topic. So, you know, there'll be people that aren't in your breakout room that are hopefully contributing to the same Padlet. It would be great to have lots and lots of you contributing to the Padlet. So don't think that one person from the group is going to be the scribe for the rest of the group. Just go for it. And it doesn't matter if we've got duplicate stuff, that's not an issue at all. Because ultimately what we want to do is, it's a little bit of a brain dump and it's okay. Not everything's going to be perfect, but we will share those PDFs with you so that you've got the thinking of across this great group here. Because if you think about it, what have we got? We've got all these people on this webinar who know their stuff, who know HDR really well. And so we're actually really going to get some great minds thinking about this. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go back to your real university and say, hey, this is what we're doing. But it might just start a conversation. It might start a different way of thinking about how selection's done and what we do for candidates while they're in our university. For your patience on that one, because I do know that some of you weren't able to download the breakout room guide, but fortunately we got that sorted, so that's good. So yeah, so our breakout rooms, we had actually 3 breakout rooms, or 3 topics. And the first one, we might just go through what the first one was. It was about the applicant, the application itself. So in terms of, it was really about sort of putting you in the position that you've been asked to advise on how you might actually adjust the application and the application process so that you might recognise the career aspiration personas and identify the current capabilities, how you might do that through an application process, and assist the applicant to appreciate that they will have quite a little bit of, you know, work to do in terms of career development. So I just wanted to share with you the Padlet, and you should, we'll go into A. So it would be great to hear from a room, a representative from the room. But here is, how would you go about identifying career aspiration persona that may best looking at their CV, or the best thing to conduct an interview. So don't necessarily fit a persona. That's exactly right. Many will be open-minded about possibilities. That's true. Consider work and life skills. And I think some candidates enter with very clear goals. That's true. Others cannot envision what's going on. And I must say, I do a little bit of work with candidates on their research identity as candidates. And it is very surprising how often there will be candidates that don't really have a good understanding of why they're even doing their degree, and what career outcome they might have from their degree. So I'm just wondering if someone that took this topic, if you'd like to talk to this a little bit, please. All right, who was in A? Who had topic A?
Anne-Marie, I could say a few things about some of our conversations.
Thank you, Mark.
Just one thing we did talk a bit about was discipline difference. And in some disciplines, you know, because I teach some coursework at graduate level, and I see students across many different disciplines within our College of Design and Social Context. at RMIT, and there are some students in those classes who have clearly a very clear idea what they want to do. There's property construction and program management school, and typically those students have very clear ideas, I think. But then there are others who might be doing a film studies project or something like that, who have a much less clear idea and are much more open to, well, what can you suggest to me? So I suppose that's just one thing to keep in mind there.
Yeah. That is good. And obviously, you know, it's like anything. When you do personas, not everybody is going to fit into all the personas, you know, like, but I suppose they just give us a little bit of help, and hopefully someone's on the periphery at least that we might be able to think about that. Anybody else who had scenario A, the application process, if you'd like to contribute to the conversation, because it would be good to hear from you. Oh, you're a shy lot.
I think Mark summed up our conversation pretty well there. I spoke about like being in psychology, for example. We have a DCLIM program, so a professional program with very clear goals and outlines and aspirations for those students. But we also, I think it may be very context dependent or content dependent, as well as to what aspirations might be. So I guess some fields of psychology will lead to certain things, and other students are attracted because of their lived experience. And I think it's those ones specifically that probably either don't know what the possibilities are post PhD, but they're in there maybe motivated by lived experience or and I think that's a very would be a very common thing in a field like psychology.
Right. Yeah. So they're attracted to address per se a personal problem, not realizing that there's a whole gamut out beyond that personal issue.
Or they would assume because of they've come to it perhaps with lived experience that it's an advocacy kind of thing they want to do, but not necessarily have any thoughts or even awareness about the other potentials, like in policy or other ways they could put it into practice. So
yeah. And I mean that is really sort of like an important element of doctoral research at the moment. It's about sort of like expanding the perception of candidates to realize that they have multiple opportunities. Like, you know, it's not necessarily a linear path per se, and it's important for us as universities to really think about opening those horizons, those mindsets for candidates. Alrighty. Scenario B. So this, I think, is a really interesting one in the sense that, okay, we've got the career personas, and, you know, every university is going to have issues with regard to resources. As we were mentioning, I think it was with Danny, you know, to 1,000 students, it's not necessarily going to be possible to develop a bespoke program for, you know, candidate A, for example. And so we do have to get some economies of scale, and we do know that there are things that will be common for all candidates, regardless of what their career outcome or their career aspirations might be, is that, you know, there'll be commonalities, but there's probably some niche things that we could do. And I really like the way it was raised about different disciplines, because obviously different disciplines will require different attributes and different capabilities. You know, Sharon, for example, the psychology candidates, whereas we were speaking with John earlier in the session, who is a Monash in Department of Mathematics. Well, that's going to be quite different in terms of what those capabilities are going to be. So there will be a need for some niche work. So scenario B was really about saying, well, what are the commonalities that we'd have across all students? Here I am, I've been invited to actually advise on the researcher professional development program. Someone's come to me for this expertise. They want me to offer this expertise. What am I going to say? And so, you know, what are the commonalities and what are those niche things. So I really like here, DT, thank you, short videos from alumni on what they did, having that as a resource. So that's really fantastic. That's sort of, you know, there's nothing like being able to see yourself in someone else, isn't it? And really those videos, you know, obviously looking at different cultural backgrounds, different disciplines, you know, could really enliven that and give people a sense of being something that maybe they haven't necessarily thought about. There's that coursework in the doctoral and the master's degrees. So yeah, networking opportunities, presenting, absolutely. And there we look at what will you suggest for the personas specific. So again, using the alumni to really bring those personas to life, and through making things real, that this is actually what happened. Co-designing with community. I'm just wondering, does someone who was in scenario B want to talk about what their thoughts were? I wish I had like A, B, and C against your names, because I could, you know, bring someone out. I'm just wondering, would someone like to contribute?
I can say briefly, I put a note in there about kind of how PhD programs are structured can address this. So there are existing programs involving industry placements that are built into the PhD, like the CSIRO PhD scholarships, which is Commonwealth co-funded.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Paris. Anyone else? I do love some of your names too. They're good. DT, were you contributing on behalf of your group or yourself?
Hi, that was me. The system gives you a random name, which is why there's all the random names in there.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. I thought you were all very creative.
I did a couple for myself, but also for notes that our group was talking about. So the short video is one that was attributed to me. It was actually someone else's. So thank you, Susan. Yeah, we had a bit of a talk about all the different things, but particularly about the importance of involving alumni and helping people see how they could get to those. And I had that top one where the arrow, was that my arrow? Oh, sorry, that was my arrow on the screen. On the right-hand side about the alumni panels. I think particularly about transitioning between the two, because that seems to be a bigger thing as well, of you might transition out into industry or government or whatever, but then how you transition back in again. So there's often people in your institution that have come through that, talking about how that might work, and, you know, how are you going to sell yourself as a researcher if you've been in a government role or something and you haven't got that track record that might be expected for that kind of role, and things like that.
Yeah, that's really good, and that's a really good point to remember too, in terms of, you know, careers of many years ago were often sort of like pretty linear, and it was one sort of area, whereas we know now that people have, you know, shorter careers potentially in a particular industry or a particular sector, and there's movement between sectors. So that's another interesting thing to think about, that these aren't necessarily like the only persona and career aspiration that someone might have. So thanks a lot, Carla, for doing that. I appreciate you offering that from your group. Thank you. And let's go to scenario C, which I thought might be a good one, sort of leading the transformation. So, you know, the scenario here was that you've decided you're going to go ahead with this. You're really going to start to think about, at selection, a little bit more about career aspirations. You know, thinking about who are the stakeholders that you're actually going to think about, how do I get into their mindsets? What are the things that are actually going to help them come on this train ride with me, that I'm going to sort of like think about really changing the psyche with regard to my university, to say, I'm really going to start looking at these career aspirations at selection. And I noticed there, supervisors, they're a critical stakeholder, aren't they? And getting into the mindset of stakeholders and understanding sort of what resistance that they might have to something like this. I'm sure all of you can already hear some of the resistance that they might be having. They might say, oh, this is too much hard. We always do enough work. Oh, we've got to wait till candidature, all those sorts of things. But if you want to really pull this a little bit forward earlier into the process and the interaction with the candidate, you're really going to have to get them on board. What are the benefits for them? And this was really about you thinking as a leader, what am I going to, how can I communicate to them that this is going to be beneficial for them? So, you would hope that if you've got that greater alignment between career aspirations and professional development, that you're actually going to have a candidate that's actually probably going to be happier and content as a candidate, and therefore be more successful, maybe make better progress. And, as a supervisor, we're hoping that you would have timely completion, a better timely completion, which is, really good for the supervisor, but also, for the supervisor to really understand the candidate better, so that you're actually spending your resource of time on things that are actually going to be well received, and also that are going to have an impact on the candidate's experience, on the quality of their research and their timeliness. I'm wondering if someone who had a C, was in this topic, might like to contribute to this.
Hi, I was in group 5. I'm
Thank
Catherine. The first thing that all of us said were supervisors were obviously the obvious one. I think, and we actually had a supervisor in our room, which was great, because I think they sort of echoed what and I'm a professional staff member, said around supervisors potentially seeing this as an additional burden. They're already extremely busy. There are already very high expectations. And there is already a lot to pack into a PhD. So, while there's obvious benefits of considering this at the start, what does that actually look like? And then, how do we communicate with them? How do we sort of look at a smooth adoption of the new approach? And I think something as well that we discussed around was, what is the benefit of this and what's the purpose of it? There's obviously a purpose for a student, but what's the purpose of it in terms of a supervisor? What benefit is it in terms of, are we going to use this to actually rank a student in a scholarship? And how do you measure that? How do you compare different career aspirations? And, is there a concern then that one is sort of considered better than another? Which obviously there's already an argument that exists that people sort of, we obviously, most institutions have got issues around discipline and, how much STEM gets versus how much, the humanities or social sciences gets. And so there were some of the things that we talked about, and we had fairly vocal people. So I'll hand it over to someone else in our room.
Sounds good. Anyone else from Catherine's room like to contribute?
I was the said supervisor, and the idea is, like, I'm on this call because I'm actually running a supervisor mentor course. I'm the mentor, and I think for A, that's a great idea to bring up new supervisors, and B, to get likes of the scholarship people and the admin people on those. We only meet once a month, so if they have these ideas and they have these things they want to put in, you more or less do have to put it in front of a supervisor's face for them to take notice of it. So it's a really good input. The other suggestion that I had is, I found it in my PhD, the very first year they gave me a third year PhD student, and I only met twice, but they pretty much just went, here's what you do, here's what you don't do, think about this. They weren't even in the same discipline, but it was still incredibly helpful. So setting up within PhD mentorships as well can be really helpful, and it can be across discipline. It doesn't need to be within the same discipline.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for that feedback. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That peer-to-peer is something that HDRs really, really value, and creating links between HDRs, whether they're in the same level or at a different stage, really, really helpful. So thank you so much. Alrighty, so we're sort of getting very close where we are on 1:29, so I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to just go through the last of this. So we did our Padlets and our sharing. At the beginning, remember I said, I did the spoiler alert, we're not going to have an answer necessarily. And Catherine, I think you summed up really well. It's a big issue. This is not an easy issue to be thinking about. And there are, there are so many things that we need to be thinking about. And, importantly, it's not necessarily that we're going to change things overnight. This could be a gradual approach that we start to think. But I think it is an important area. When we think of sort of like, we have a lot of responsibility as universities for graduate outcomes, and how do we actually create those graduate outcomes that are meaningful and worthwhile for our candidates? And how late do we leave that, or how early we bring that in? It's a dilemma. Okay, the same as our students have that paradoxical experience where there were some really great things in there and some really awful things in there. There are pros and cons. So that's all I wanted to do today. I just really wanted to start the conversation, start the thinking, and who knows where it might lead at your university, and start the conversation and just, start to think maybe a little bit more about career aspirations of our graduates, because no doubt it's an important area for your university, but it's also so important for Australia. If we look at the Accord of last year, like our graduates of doctoral degrees, some of the people who are going to lead the nation in the future in various guises. So it's a really important area for us. So just want to say thank you. I will leave the Padlet up for the rest of the day. If you decide you want to go in and just put a few more things in, that'd be really good. And then I'm pretty sure that Tracy will send the Padlet PDFs to you sometime next week. But I do want to say thank you very much for coming today, and really good to see you. And I really do think you're all working in a fantastic area of the university, and a really, really important area, and just wish you all the best. I've offered to stay on if anybody wants to have a chat about anything. Perfectly fine, but if you've got to go somewhere, perfectly fine as well. Okay, so take good care, people.